Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. At this hour, the body of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg lays in repose at the Supreme Court as members of the public pay their final respects. On Friday, the late justice becomes the first woman in history to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol, followed by a private interment at Arlington National Cemetery. We look at her life and how her successor will impact the Supreme Court and our nation for years to come. Plus, shock and anger over the decision of a Kentucky grand jury. No homicide charges against the police officers involved in the murder of Breonna Taylor. Lots to talk about on Another View. We'll be right back after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died of pancreatic cancer last Friday. She was 87 years old. According to her granddaughter, her final wish was that the next elected president of the United States picks her successor. The Republicans aren't having it. President Trump is expected to announce his choice for the next Supreme Court justice, and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says there will be a vote before the November election. We'll talk about why all of this matters. But first, the Kentucky grand jury declined to bring charges against the police officers involved in the murder of Breonna Taylor. Last night, people all over the country took to the streets in protest, and in Louisville, 2 officers were shot. Both have non-life-threatening injuries. Violence in response to violence is not the way to go. But the anger and frustration of African Americans and others is certainly understandable. Joining us to talk about all of this is Dr. Eric Claville, Director of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University. Eric, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. And an original OG of Another View, author, journalist, media consultant, and former member of the Another View Roundtable, Dr. Wil LaVeist. How you doing, Will?
Barbara, I'm doing well. Always a pleasure to be back. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much. So I want to get from both of you your immediate initial reactions when you heard the news about the officers not being charged with homicide or any charges directly related to the murder of Breonna Taylor. And Will, let's start with you.
Barbara, upset, anger, language that I really can't use on air, and basically comes down to here we go again, and when is this, going to stop? I mean, I'm north of 50 years old, and this has been going on. I've had my first experience with this when I was 14, growing up in Brooklyn, New York, with, Randolph Evans being shot, a 14-year-old kid in my neighborhood being shot by a police officer point blank who got little to no penalty for what happened. So this has been going on throughout all of my lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Eric, your first reaction when you heard?
Unfortunately, my first reaction was I was not surprised. Based upon the laws of qualified immunity and also based upon the culture of police departments across our country and the history of policing in America, I expected that to be the case. I want our audience to understand that the charges in the Breonna Taylor case that came down with the grand jury were not attached to the actions of the officers of shooting at Breonna Taylor going into the house. It was the fact that they found that the officer was reckless with the use of his bullets when it went into another apartment. So it had absolutely nothing. In other words, the grand jury, under the law, basically justified every action of the officers. So that means that if police make a mistake and come into your house, which they have done before, there's actually a case out of Atlanta, Georgia, where it was the wrong house. Police went in and shot an elderly man who was sitting in his lazy boy chair watching television and, of course, killed him on the spot. But the issue that people have today and that we're seeing as a nation is that when police make a mistake, they're okay. Nothing's going to happen to them because the law gives them the out, right? Even here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, I think Delegate Bourne put up a bill to eliminate qualified immunity, and there was people who didn't vote for it, and there were those that abstained on both sides of the aisle. So it does show that the police unions and the stakeholders that pump in millions of dollars into elected officials, into campaigns, and that have a stake in the business of government, their feelings about this. So as America, we've marched. We've been marching for years and years, and I think the people are really tired of it. And I think this is a very dangerous moment because of the rhetoric that's coming from the White House, coupled with the actions of white supremacists. And we have to call them who they are. They are white supremacists. They are domestic terrorists that show up with automatic rifles, that show up with bulletproof vests, that show up with military gear to intimidate citizens exercising their right to protest, even show up at polls, even though they don't have weapons on them. They're shouting and so forth, as it was in Northern Virginia. But at the end of the day, just like the officer that killed Philando Castile in Minnesota, he's back on his job. And many officers that have come into the limelight and news for killing unarmed black men are making a mistake. And keep in mind, none of these people did what they said they were set to do. In other words, these people lost their lives being an innocent citizen. But all of these individuals are back at work, or they have been transferred to other units, police units across the country within their jurisdiction.
So Daniel Cameron, the Attorney General, who was the special prosecutor, who is African American, spent a great deal of time. I watched his presentation to the press, and it was 21 minutes long, explaining about the law and explaining about how, based on the law, he had to follow the law, etc., in terms of making this decision. There are a lot of questions around whether or not he actually even presented all of the information to the grand jury. So talk about the line that you have to walk when you are an African-American in charge on the inside of the system, and trying to balance all of that with your own personal feelings in terms of what's going on. Will, let me start with you.
Well, Barbara, you really hit on a point of this that really angers me, and that is, I'm just going to be honest, as someone who used to cover politicians as well as I covered police when I was a reporter at the Arizona Republic, Phoenix Gazette, and also at the Daily Press, interacted with police and politicians all the time. Mm-hmm. And what I see here is that the problem, and I love Eric. Eric's my man. He's a lawyer, attorney. But we have too many attorneys that are essentially just politicians. They are either have political aspirations and are navigating their way up the ladder to get to where they want to be. And so when you look at someone like Daniel Cameron, the first African-American attorney general in Kentucky, clearly, if you look at him and his involvement with being with Mitch McConnell, he's a protege of Mitch McConnell. You've got to believe that he has some political aspirations. You got to believe that he's looking at the governorship at some point. And so what often happens is you get these high-profile cases, you take them on because you can navigate them to actually help navigate your career. So what happens? You get on a case like this. He said when he came into office that he wanted to make this Attorney General's office no longer political, but he's been very political in his actions, in his engagement. He's joined a lawsuit against the Democratic governor of Kentucky around not wearing the mandate to wear masks. So he's been very political in his behavior. So he takes this case on, and you pinpointed it. What did he present to the grand jury? Because the grand jury system and a prosecutor should be able to present a case that the grand jury essentially rubber stamps and says, okay, you've got enough to take this to court and let a jury decide. So the point is, he takes this case on and he presents in a way that will help navigate his career. Kentucky is a majority white state, about 90% population is white. To win a national statewide election, you got to be able to get those votes. So what perfect way to navigate this than to take on a high-profile case like this, have it be moved ahead and delivered in a way that supports police, supports this core audience that they want to protect police. You stand there as an African-American appearing as if you did the best that you could. The family gets a $12 million settlement, so you can say the family got something, and his political career is able to continue to move on. You can't take that out of the mix. And we just have too many attorneys that are taking on cases and are doing things, not in approaching blind justice, but thinking about their own political expediency and how can I navigate this to move my own career along. And the people who deserve justice has become collateral damage. So that's the question. What did he present? What did you present to a grand jury? Because the grand jury system is like they're just looking at the evidence that's presented to them and saying, okay, you have enough to go forward. They're not adjudicating the case.
Right.
They're just saying you have enough to go forward. So what did he present is the key, and why did he choose to present what he presented?
And that is something we won't know because the grand jury is secret unless they decide to come forth and to say something. Eric, but let me ask you this. Would you have rather heard, he made a point which I agree with, and I've said this all along, that African Americans are not a monolith. We don't walk in lockstep. We don't all think the same. We don't all react to things the same way. Having said that, would it have been more helpful for him, even if understanding that he had to work within the laws that are on the books right now, if he had made some kind of statement to say, and when we get through this process, we will look at, changing the law or making sure that the law is more equitable or something that would have given people some hope that this won't continue to happen?
Barbara, I'll quote Devontae Lewis, who's the Director of Public Affairs and Outreach at the Louisiana Budget Project Office in Baton Rouge. He was, this is his quote in the AP story regarding the Black Attorney General that choked up during the announcement. And he said, a black face in a high place doesn't mean anything if it's not about actually fundamentally decolonizing and tearing down the systems of inequality and inequity that have existed in the country since its founding. He's not there for that. As Wil stated, he's a protege of McConnell. He's a Trump supporter, and he can have whatever belief he wants. That's his belief, and he can have that. This is America. You're more than happy to do that. But our beliefs and our actions do come with consequences, and our inactions as well. But here, my belief is that as an African American, as a black person in America, especially when it has connections to the history of slavery, Jim Crow, and the civil rights era here in our country, to me, I really can't see how a person can turn a blind eye to that history when looking at the law and understanding that it's not equitable. It's not. We've admitted that it's not equitable, which is why we created amendments to the Constitution to try to correct it. We admitted that it's not equitable because we created acts within Congress and to change policy and to suppress policies that are still on the books. Keep in mind, one thing that Governor Northam did here in the Commonwealth is that he created a commission to identify and remove discriminatory language and laws from from Virginia's books. Why is that important? Because the law is an expression of the people who have the power and influence to create public policy and laws and dictate practice. So it's very important that we remove that law, because if you don't remove it, those words are still there. And the only thing that's stopping those laws from being effectuated is the acts or the acts and the laws that suppress it, or as I like to call it, keeping their foot on the head of the serpent of racism. What our president has done, he's taken this, he's given boldness to individuals to take their foot off of that head of that serpent through practice, and also by the uprising of individuals in the country through boldness. So you made a very good point. I just want to point this out for our listeners about grand juries. Grand juries are secret, okay? Mm-hmm. The proceedings are secret. No judges are present. Proceedings are led by the prosecutor. They can call witnesses, but they don't have to testify. And the courts lack an inherent authority to authorize the disclosure of grand jury matters. And even if court reporters are there to transcribe the proceedings, the records are sealed.
So we will never know. So we'll never know what was presented.
We'll never know. We'll actually never know. And, that's just the way it is. So, again, as I stated before, I didn't expect the wanton reckless indictment to come down, to be very honest.
And you know what? Explain that, Eric, so that people understand what wanton endangerment means.
Basically, it means that a person was reckless in their behavior. So if you have a baby stroller and you're walking on the walking path, and you leave your baby in a stroller or your toddler in a stroller to walk across the street to check the mail, and then you come back, someone can see that and say you've been wantonly reckless in supervising your child. Or if you're driving and you're texting and driving, that's wanton reckless. You get into an accident. So basically, and in talking with a colleague of mine who's a law enforcement, basically what's going to happen in this case, I believe, it's going to get played down to a misdemeanor. He'll get time served. He won't do a day in jail. He'll get a fine. Internally,
his bail was only $15,000.
Yeah, so, that's a drop in the bucket, right? 10% of that is what, $1,500? Mm-hmm, of course the police union probably paid for that. And what's going to happen is that he'll get, like I said, a fine. He's not going to get any time in jail. Internally, he may be removed from that police department, which is a good look.
Well, he was fired, right? So he's already gone because he's been fired, if I'm not mistaken.
He'll definitely, after this, I can guarantee you, probably go to another county and get on. The same thing that happened in the Michael Brown case. A lot of those guys went from St. Louis to the outside police districts and so forth.
Okay.
So again, it's also nepotism, racism, discrimination that exists within these police units. I talk to African-American black law enforcement, and they talk about it all the time, how it's so hard for them to work in an environment like that, the racist language, the abuse that they receive, being passed over for promotions, having to file EEOC claims just to get promoted within the department. And keep in mind, in a lot of cities, the police chief they're not elected, they're selected, usually by the city manager. All right, who basically has all the authority to select them. And those city managers are then chosen by the powers to be. And then within those areas of the cities that basically use government as their personal contracting company.
Go ahead,
so it is what it is.
Barbara, what Eric just brought up about city managers making these selections is a very important point. When you look at what I've said earlier about too many politicians who are basically keepers of the law. And that's a big problem for Virginia. Does Virginians realize that they're the only state that all of the judges are appointed or are political appointments? Wow. Your judges don't run for office. So if all of the judges are political appointments coming out of the General Assembly and otherwise, how does this color how they navigate their careers and what decisions they make in certain cases and who they align themselves with? So you're not getting the voice of the people impacting who is actually passing judgment and deciding cases over them. So if you got all these people who are supposed to be the keepers of the law who are essentially politicians, they're either in the General Assembly, then they go out of the General Assembly, they become judges. This is all too political. And I'm telling you, it plays out in real ways in people's lives. I've done it. I've seen it as a reporter. I've seen it in my personal life, the way it plays out, that people will take cases, will navigate those cases to pad their own career aspirations. And that's what I think you're very much seeing here in the case with Daniel Cameron. What did he present to the grand jury that had the grand jury making this decision? We're all focused on the grand jury and its secret and what did they do and blah. What did he present as the attorney general, and why didn't he present certain things? Why? I'm making the accusation that he's navigating his career and his political aspirations in a state. He's African American, 90% white. He one day wants to be governor. How would this case look on that record for him being able to make that political move?
Wow. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Carl joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Carl. You're on the air.
How are you? Thank you. Two questions. A lot of protesting going on. Is there not a continuous protest anywhere in Chicago about the continuous shootings and killings of each other up there? And then the other question was, maybe for Mr. Eric, please. I'm sorry, I don't know your last name.
Claville, sir.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
What were the circumstances around this shooting with Miss Breonna? Were the police actually inside the home, or were they fired upon first outside the home?
Okay, thank you for your call, Carl. We'll take that. Eric, you want to start?
Sure. So as it relates to the actual case itself, I would ask all of our listeners to do your research on it. Matter of fact, you could probably just put in Breonna Taylor, and the case will pop up. But when they gave the question is, was it a no knock or a knock, right? Mm-hmm. So when they actually announced themselves, or they did knock, is what the neighbor is saying and so forth. Of course, the boyfriend didn't hear it. They, of course, bust through the door. And if anybody busts through your door at nighttime while you're asleep, I mean, what's your instinct? Oh, let me see if this is the police so I can cooperate with them. No, you're going to start defending yourself. You're going to start busting, right? You're going to defend yourself. You're going to defend your home. So that's why, keep in mind, the boyfriend, initially they arrested and charged him, and then they dropped all charges against the boyfriend.
And he admitted that he shot first because he thought it was an intruder coming into his home. Exactly.
So with that being the case, I think the average person can reasonably, just like the court did, and the prosecutor, they said, we got to let this guy go, because the reasonable person can agree that this is happening. And also the caller's statement about the killings in Chicago and those things. A lot of times we get calls on this show where individuals try to utilize rhetorical devices, what I call whataboutisms, to try to misplace the burden of proof. We're not dealing with that, okay? We're dealing with this issue of police misconduct, police brutality, and police killings, period. That's the issue that we're dealing with. Those killings that do take place, the crimes that do take place in areas of our country that are marginalized, those are issues as well. And what we need to do with those issues in those parts of the country is deal with the societal issues that cause individuals to become unemployed, cause individuals to seek out another way of living that does not lead to a beneficial, productive life. And those are societal issues of, again, unemployment, also of discrimination, also of nepotism that does not apply to them. So I would ask all of our listeners and all of our callers if we could focus on the issue at hand, but also, let's not look to blame, say, well, just because I put a stumbling block in your way, what about what you did 5 years ago? All right, let's deal with the issue now. And by doing that, we can all basically hopefully come to a conclusion.
Go ahead, Will.
Barbara, if I could.
Yeah. I
mean, I would ask the caller to simply ponder this question. What if he was sitting in his living room watching TV, sipping on a glass of water? The police came up in his living room and shot at him, and he shot back, or he shot first and got killed. What would he say, and what would he want for his family members after he's passed away? They came in the wrong apartment. The man wasn't doing it. The caller wasn't doing anything wrong. And then police said, oh, my bad, we got the wrong apartment. What would he want for his family members at that point?
Mm-hmm.
This is what Breonna Taylor's family is facing. And that has nothing to do with people in Chicago or people in Appalachia, what they might be doing and killing each other, or people down in New Mexico and how they may be killing each other. How would he feel? What justice would he want for his family members if that happened to him?
If you're just joining us, we're talking about the passing. Well, we haven't gotten there yet, but we will be talking about the passing of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and its impact upon the upcoming presidential election, as well as the Kentucky grand jury's decision to not bring charges against the police officers involved in the killing of Breonna Taylor. Our guests are Dr. Eric Claville, director of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University, and author, journalist, and media consultant, Dr. Wil LaVeist. All right, last question on this, and then we're going to transition to Ruth Bader Ginsburg and what the Supreme Court is all about. But my question to you gentlemen is this, and that is, where do we go from here? Because it seems like time and time again, America continues to show Black folks that, in fact, our lives don't matter. So where's the hope? What do we need to do to stay hopeful and to stay in this fight? Eric, go ahead, Will.
I think the hope is what you see people demonstrating in the streets peacefully, people of all different races and colors, and even political Black backgrounds, because there are Republicans who see this and are like, no, this is not right. And people who are standing up and peacefully demonstrating and saying, look, this is not what our democracy is supposed to be about. And I've said before, when Donald Trump was in 2016, when we were all shocked that he was voted into president, I said, in many ways, I said on your show, Barbara, in many ways, this is probably going to be good for the country because it's going to force the country to really be tested at, does it really believe, and are we truly a nation of law, truly a nation of justice, equality, and all those things that we say we believe that we are. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're being tested. We're seeing constitutional tests and threats coming left and right. And I think that in a lot of ways that is the hope that I see, is that people are recognizing that, yes, who we claim to be is at risk. And are we really who we say we are? And if we are, then we would be peacefully going to the streets and we would make the decisions like changing. For example, I say to Virginia, you should look seriously on why are all of your judges appointed and why don't you have the ability to vote for these judges? And who are they? And what decisions are they making and making for us? Which is a segue into what Absolutely. You're going to be talking about Ginsburg. This is for real. This is serious if we're a nation of laws.
Eric, so let's talk about the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And she was the Notorious RBG, and she did a lot for women's rights, and she did a lot for civil rights and things of that nature. But her death means that right now the court is there are 8 members. Trump is insistent on naming a nominee, which he says he's going to do on Saturday. And then McConnell says there will be a vote. What will that mean to the Supreme Court, and why should we care?
Well, first of all, let me give my condolences to the Ruth Bader Ginsburg's family and also to all her friends and so forth. You're right. That is her legacy. She, as Senator Kennedy was known as the liberal lion, she is probably going to be known as the liberal lioness. And I would like to give this one point of constructive criticism of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. For all that she did, and this has also been an issue across the board with all Supreme Court justices, for all that she did, the 13 years she served on the D.C. Circuit, the 27 years she served on the U.S. Supreme Court Circuit, she only selected, out of all of her law clerks, only one African-American or Black law clerk in 40 years. And this is an issue across the board, okay? But I want to make sure that if people understand that these are highly selected positions, and when you're in these highly selected positions, in position of influence, mouth service does nothing unless you actually work to tear down the inequitable laws and policies and give access to upward mobility. Now,
Okay.
I'll pivot to what this would mean. First of all, in the words of Jesus, when he talked to the Pharisees, "Oh, ye hypocrites! Oh, ye hypocrites!" When we look at McConnell and these Republicans, Lindsey Graham, hold me to my word. Use my words against me. I mean, needless. There's no need to say more. Now, I have an issue with the confirmation. Trump can nominate whoever he wants, but it's the fact that you're going to have this vote before the election, based upon your words, based upon your actions 4 years ago, based upon all this political rhetoric. But this is politics, right? All's fair in love, war, and politics. So I have to respect McConnell for using power when he has it, but at the same time, it is hypocritical. Now, what this will mean, he's going to appoint someone, and as Will stated, this is all about power, period. And you're not going to put someone in a place of lifetime appointment that's going to work to tear down the walls of racism and years of inequality and inequity. Are you kidding? You know, this is, and I've said this before on the show, and I'll continue to say this country was created by well-to-do, white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, period. The laws were created to benefit them as it relates in the preamble to their posterity. Laws and policies and practices have been created throughout every state in order to effectuate those that belief, still to this day. So I first of all, I'm not surprised. And again, just like the decision in Breonna Taylor, just like the decision in Philando Castile, and all these other decisions that have come down the pipe. And there's a lot of, I'll just say there's a lot of pressure on Keith Ellison, the attorney general out of Minnesota, to make these charges stick with the murder of George Floyd. But at the same time, this is going to mean it's going to be a 6-3 conservative bloc. But I believe that the Chief Justice will be that swing vote in these decisions because he's more of a jurist than anything. But this person who's going to be nominated and confirmed is a person that's going to be a staunch conservative who believes in all of the rhetoric that Trump is spewing, that McConnell and those guys have worked with think tanks out in Washington and around the Beltway in order to feed this belief.
So, Will, is there anything that the Democrats can do to slow it down, to keep it from happening, to make a different selection? Is there anything that anybody can do, I guess is the question.
Oh, I don't know specifically concerning the numbers that they may have, like if they're in the same position that the Republicans were back in 2016, where they were on the other side and making the same argument. But they have talked about, and in the filibuster, they've talked about making a vote to expand the size of the Supreme Court. So there, again, the way our democracy works, there's always something in there that can be done. And again, like I said, I love my man Eric as an attorney, but lawyers, they specialize in this skill of gyrating and moving around and using rhetoric to justify things that just yesterday they were arguing the opposite thing. And now they're saying the same thing today to make the different argument. That's what they do. And this is what is so bad for our country. You got too many lawyers, and we need more people from different disciplines in Congress that come at these issues in a more common sense way rather than this win at all costs type of way.
I see that.
It is bad for our country, and that's what you're seeing playing out. They utilize rhetoric, make the same arguments on Wednesday that they're making on Friday to change the whole to go in a totally different direction.
Well, Eric, before you start to defend yourself, is there anything that the voter, that everyday Americans can do in this situation, does even the everyday average American even care that this is happening? Do they really understand the ramifications of what this means?
Well, to answer your question, and then I'll give a 5-second defense to Will. But to answer your question, as you say citizens, and you have to break that up, Barbara. As African American Black people, and we talk about these issues a lot. Sometimes you just get tired. Sometimes you just get tired, right? But you have to keep fighting. There is absolutely nothing that African Americans can do to change the laws and policies and the system that doesn't benefit them. It only uses them as commodities, all right? Your talents, your skills. It allows a few to receive benefits, and you put those up front to say, look at our progress. But as Chris Rock said, the election of Barack Obama and any African Americans getting to the top is not progress for African Americans. It's progress for white America that's saying, hey, now we can really truly look at these individuals and allow them the ability to step up and have an opportunity in America like we've always had. So to your point, the question becomes, is there anything that white America of influence can do to change this and change the issues? Mm-hmm. And the question really boils down to, do you really want to jeopardize your white privilege to do this, right? Because once you go against the power structure of society, and when I say society, your community, and stand up for people who the system is set up to marginalize, then you become a target. That's why we esteem, and we should, individuals who fight for those that can't fight for themselves and lose their lives in the process of doing so. We should give them the highest esteem possible that we can. But to answer your point, there's absolutely nothing that we can do. And then I'll ask this question, Barbara. What more can we do that we haven't done?
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Shauna joins us from Newport News. Hi, Shauna. You're on the air.
How you doing?
Okay.
Great. My name is Shauna Lawson, and I'm from the Newport News Hampton chapter of Virginia Organizing. Mm-hmm. We are a statewide grassroots organization. And folks should know that the conversation of who will replace Justice Ginsburg extends to all federal courts, because the president gets to nominate judges for all of federal vacancies. Mm-hmm. Voting on November 3rd isn't just for the president. It's for future judges, too. And that's part of the reason why it's so important that folks understand and know the voting procedure. Also, in person, early voting is open in Virginia until October 31st, where they can go in and submit a ballot or drop off a mail-in ballot. The deadline in Virginia to register a vote is October 3rd. People should check with their local registrar for more information and make sure they check in with their loved ones.
Okay. Thank you, Shauna, for that. And we are going to be talking next week also more in depth about the voting process and what people need to do in terms of their absentee ballots, in terms of their voting in person, early voting, and so forth. Thank you for making that point. Gentlemen, she makes up a really good point that we are voting for judges of the future in this election also because of who makes the appointments to the federal courts. Eric.
I mean, that's true. At the same time, I think that, and when we're talking about the general public, we understand that process, but the general public are affected by local things and things that they see on the news. The Supreme Court really, they're that check and balance of politics. So they don't really come to the forefront until a big issue comes up. Then they kind of go back, right? One of my major constructive criticisms of the Obama administration is that they did not include as many African Americans in appointments, such as I believe that high-level appointments. And I believe that if Obama would have nominated a black female to the U.S. Supreme Court, I believe the Senate would have had a harder time to not take her up and confirm her. At least we would have voted, at least. But at the same time, I mean, it's very true, but it's not relatable to the average person. And when the average person see politicians, as Will stated, flip-flopping and going back and forth and fighting and so forth, you get tuned out. And that's the danger of contentious politics, especially when you don't have the bully pulpit.
But what about the whole idea of President Trump has come out and said very specifically that he needs this ninth person because depending on the outcome of the election, he may need that person to make sure that he stays in office. So this whole thing about voting and about making sure that we vote, I need you guys to talk about why that is particularly critical for the African-American community. Go ahead, Will.
Well, I think that's an excellent point. That's why I would actually push back some on what Eric said earlier about what, the hopelessness in the sense of African Americans. I mean, I think the vote in this country still matters. Then the other thing that matters is economic power. So the more we build our economic power and the more we utilize our voting power smartly is how you make change. That's how our ancestors made change, going back to prior to the founding of the nation and back to from eradicating slavery all up into the point of where we are now. So voting is critical because you vote into power the people who will make decisions in your interest. So just like I pointed out earlier, in Virginia, you don't vote for your judges. Your General Assembly puts your judges in place. So you have to vote for legislators who are going to make decisions in your interest, or you're likely to find yourself standing in front of a judge who could care less about delivering justice for you. They're there managing your court case to advance their own agenda. So this is why voting is important. Economic power is important in this country. This is why when you do boycotts, people listen. This is why you see with the NBA and the NFL going from, trying to misconstrue that kneeling is about disrespecting the troops. Now they've gone from that to everybody's wearing Black Lives Matter on the back of their helmets and their jerseys. Why? Because economic power and the threat of boycott and losing money matters. So voting and economic power matters. So the next time you think about not voting, you need to think again. Think about your ancestors. The next time you think about what you're going to spend your money on, instead of spending on building wealth, and you spending it on nonsense, that's where the decisions are at.
Go ahead, Eric.
Barbara, if I could push back on Will just a moment. I never said
I love how you two like pushing back on each other.
That's what lawyers do.
No, Will, I agree with your statement, but I never said the vote didn't matter. I said that people they can't, as average citizens, don't really make and can't really make the connection unless we make the connection for them. And listen, I say it all the time. It's only been since really 1970 to 2020 that African Americans have had the opportunity and protection under the law to participate fully in the American dream and process. It's been only 50 years. So I want to, 1965, 64, 1968, and the civil rights legislation package, that wasn't that long ago. So I want us to put this into context. But at the same time, now we're getting down into the nitty-gritty of policies and practices and laws in every corner of our country and how it's all connected, right? And it's connected to keep power in the status quo and to continue to keep groups that are poor, disenfranchised, and Black suppressed. It's all about power. And when we talk about voting, we just can't vote a ticket, meaning that, just because they have this D or R behind their name. We have to vote for people, because everyone that has an R or D behind their name, or everyone that's Black or white, doesn't mean that they're for your interests. And we have to make sure we put people into office and nominate them from the grassroots that are for our interests of the Black community, as opposed to for a corporate interest that supports these two parties.
Okay, we got 2 minutes left in this conversation. I want each of you to take a minute to tell how we prevent voter apathy, because today I'm sure there are people who are just saying, What's the point? Let's start with you, Wil.
I think you simplify the issue. So one of the things about the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg is that people can see that as a singular issue that they can get a grasp for and understand. Look, who do you want to elect to submit to the Senate this next Supreme Court justice, and why? And I think a lot of people can grasp onto that and say, yeah, this is what's important because of the effect that it could have for the next 40 years. Let me go and vote. So simplify the message. Get rid of stuff like defund the police that just totally confuses people. I don't know what the Democrats are thinking when they say that, but, it's just totally confusing. Simplify the message.
Thank you. That's Dr. Wil LaVeist. He is author, journalist, and a media consultant, and an original Another View Roundtable member, always. So thank you, Wil, for being with us. Eric, you get the last minute.
I believe that, again, the vote is the most powerful nonviolent weapon in our democracy. But it's just not the vote. We also have to understand that it's the laws and policies that are created behind the scenes to limit the vote. We see voter suppression now happening at the highest level with mail-in voting, misinformation about absentee voting, information about voting twice, and so forth. It's just absolute idiocy and foolishness that's happening. If we need citizens to become back engaged with our country, and on a grassroots level, to put people in office that are going to represent your community, and again, not a corporate agenda that supports the two parties. With that being the case, register to vote as soon as you turn 18. Vote in every election, local election, which are the most important, your state elections, and also the federal elections. Make your voice heard, but also make sure it's an educated voice, not an emotional voice.
Absolutely.
Do your research and understand the process.
Okay.
Vote,
we got to go.
Vote.
That is Dr. Eric Claville. He is the director of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it, and we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Essie Patha-Murkerson from Law and Order. You are listening to Another View.
Law and order takes on a very different meaning depending on where you're coming from. At any rate, in an effort to address the global pandemic and this period of social unrest, the Chrysler Museum will open a new exhibit next month called Come Together. The exhibition, which opens October the 11th, explores 4 themes: celebration, purpose, justice, and love. And the theme Justice opens doors for you to share your experiences. Our Lisa Godley takes a closer look at this community-based exhibition.
When the global pandemic hit and many of our social gathering places shut down, the Chrysler Museum was no exception. Upcoming exhibitions were placed on hold, leaving the staff to ponder what to do next.
We just started thinking, well, what can we do with our own collection that focuses on this feeling that we're all confronting, the sense of isolation, the sense of confusion, and this real desire to be with people.
Seth Feeman is Deputy Director for Art and Interpretation and the Curator of Photography at the Chrysler. He says their first thought was to plan a show about community. Then came the death of George Floyd.
COVID's part of the story, but also justice is a part of this story, and how communities can engage in the democratic process, sometimes through protest, sometimes through voting.
The collection features various pieces that address purpose, love, celebration, and justice.
There are things like historic paintings, there are glass works, there are carved marble, and things all that have to do with the theme of community. But my area of interest in particular is the photographs, and there's a large section of photographs that have to do with protests in the 50s and 60s. Oh gosh, there are so many incredible images, and there really are. There's one image in particular that is a Danny Lyon photograph that shows a Nick Field photographer, and he was at a protest in Maryland. I believe it was a George Wallace talk that was being given, and SNCC went out to protest it. And there's an image of protesters who are all sitting, and they're being confronted by a line of National Guardsmen who are all wearing gas masks. They've got bayonets out, and they've picked him up out of the crowd, and they're pulling him. And you can see him sort of being pulled out from a seated position, someone who represents the press being pulled into the fray. And I think it's a pretty stark image and not a totally unfamiliar one to our contemporary moment.
Feeman says they've deliberately expanded the exhibition to include images of musicians and athletes who were either part of the civil rights movement or who broke the color barrier.
There's one photograph by Ernest Withers, and it is an image from 1948, 49, somewhere around then, and it depicts Ernie Banks, Larry Doby, and Jackie Robinson. And what's interesting to me about the image is that these are icons of baseball who, at various levels, all crossed the color line. They became some of the first players to integrate different leagues. But what's interesting is that they're all in a dugout together, and then behind them are people in the stands, and it's all African-American watchers who are there for the game. And what it reminds us is that even at this moment when the leagues are starting to integrate, the stands weren't necessarily integrated.
The Come Together exhibit would not be complete without giving the community an opportunity to be involved. And they're asking you to share your photographs.
When I first started thinking about this, I was really motivated by the images that I saw, and they're really incredible photographs coming out of Richmond, particularly the demonstrations at Lost Cause Monument to take them down. And I thought, we've got to get these on the wall. We've got to show people these images. I've seen them on a screen, but they need to be bigger and shared more widely.
Feeman says they're not restricting submissions to recent protests, but the number of photos you can upload is limited to 10.
There's also an email address there if there are any questions that come up along the way.
Come Together Right Now, The Art of Gathering, runs October 11th through January 3rd. And for those uncomfortable with being inside the building, some Norfolk neighborhoods will become living art galleries where you can see reproductions of several pieces of art from the display. For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And the deadline to enter any photographs you may have taken of protests that occurred recently or decades ago should be submitted no later than Wednesday, September 30th. You can upload your photographs on the Come Together page located on the Chrysler Museum's website. Thank you so much for listening to Another View. As a reminder, you can always find our shows at anotherviewradio.org. And while you're there, please sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. We're on Facebook, so be sure to like us. And I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Next week, we're going to do a step-by-step guide through the voting process. So if you have questions about how to do your absentee ballot or where to go vote and so forth, we will have those answers for you. So please tune in next Thursday at noon. A very special thank you to Jonah Gridkowitz of Hearsay with Kathy Lewis fame for sitting in for Lisa Godley, who is on vacation. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer, and as always, Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Wash your hands, stay socially distant, wear your mask, stay safe, and join me again next Thursday at noon for Another View.